About 11 years back, the year is 2013, a little boy called D. Gukesh walks into, a world championship game in Chennai. He's sitting outside watching his idol, Viswanathan Anand, take on Magnus Carlsen, who was back then he was just a wannabe upstart who was trying to become a world champion. Good chess player, but then, nothing. Until then, he was not the world champion, right? So, this boy, Gukesh, is sitting outside the glass cage that they build for chess tournaments, and he is looking inside and he's telling himself, it would be pretty cool if one day I could be there inside. Now, this boy is around 8.5 years old at that stage. Then, a few days later, he watches Magnus Carlsen snatch away the crown from Viswanathan Anand, and the crown goes away for better. At that point, Gukesh tells himself, hey, it would be pretty cool if I'm the guy who gets the crown back to India. 10 years later, almost 10 or 11 years after that moment, Gukesh D has indeed managed to get back that crown to India by becoming the 18th world champion. It's a long succession line of world champions which date back to 1886 and has seen, now 18 men sit on the throne. It includes some really massive legends of the sport like Garry Kasparov, Viswanathan Anand, Bobby Fischer, you name it. There are the biggest grandmasters in the world have sat on the throne. Nobody to this day has been as young as 18 years old. When Gukesh talks about that moment, he says, that 8-year-old Gukesh would have probably cared a lot more about that moment than I do because, I've stopped caring about all of these things, the youngest ever and all of these things. On that note, I'd like to bring in my co-host for today's special episode on chess, Mihir Vasavda, who's joined us back after a while away for personal reasons, and Vinayakk, who's always there on the pod. Welcome, gentlemen. A good day to record a podcast, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, Amit, you've been away from the podcast because, you were busy doing something. And today it's good to have you back to do what Vinayakk said just before we started recording, make the ceremonial moves as celebrities often do before a big match. So a big day for you and for, Indian chess.
Yeah, I think before we get into the serious business of discussing what happened at the World Championships, I think it might sound a little self-indulgent, but a pat on the back for Amit from wherever we are recording. He's been doing stellar work on chess for a long time. And the reason he's been away from our cricket podcast is because he's been blogging the Chess World Championships and writing and filing stories day in, day out. So it must be a little bit celebratory feeling for you as well, Amit. Must feel pretty good this moment.
Oh, I don't know about very good because I'm not making whatever crores that Gukesh has made. So I'm just tired. I don't know about happy. I'm just,
You can maybe go bungee jumping like Gukesh.
No, man. Besides that, I'm just starting to realize I write about a sport where I am now, somewhere in the middle age of them and their fathers. So it does not make me feel good at all. Like what's next? Next time I know I'm like whatever, the same age group as their fathers then.
But pretty cool overall. A lot of fun. I think the World Championships itself was in the middle phase. I think it was a little dull with all the draws. Dull as in maybe not for the avid chess viewer who follows every move deeply. But the series of draws, it felt like it was always heading to the tiebreakers. And then suddenly 3 matches in the last 4, I think, were decisive. Quite a roller coaster ride, Amit. Just sum that up.
Yeah, it's incredible how many twists and turns we've had, Like you go back to the first game itself, like before the World Championship, the whole year, anybody has been talking about is how significantly Gukesh is a heavyweight and how he's going to, I think Magnus was the one who used the word massacre. People were predicting massacres. Then at some point, Magnus said that Ding is going to crumble. And none of that happened. Like we knew that Ding was not in good shape. He'd spoken about being depressed. He'd spoken about not having the confidence to make moves. Like he was getting into decent positions in games that we saw at the Olympiad and other events. But he just didn't seem to have the confidence in his own self to convert something into a win. Like he would get a upper hand and then he would basically snatch a draw from the victories of win. So he was playing like that. He'd, I think, gone 304 days or something without actually winning in a classical game. So that was the form that he was coming into in the World Championship. Everybody thinks it's going to be just a slam dunk win. Like, I don't know if anybody had predicted like a 6 7 games में 7 game जीत के Gukesh will wrap it up or something. Thankfully, nobody was that audacious. But the first game we have, Gukesh suddenly loses to Ding. Then we are like, oh, I mean, whatever all said and done, he's still a guy who's become the world champion. He knows how to become a world champion. So clearly we are seeing that. And on the other end, we are seeing a boy who's just 18, who's suddenly gotten this shot at history that he doesn't quite understand how that even works. 2 games later, we see Gukesh fight back, get a win. And that comes on back of a blunder that not anybody could have predicted coming. Like suddenly there is a blunder and then next thing you know, Gukesh has capitalized on it and won. Then we had that crazy streak of, I think, 7 draws in a row. And yeah, as you said, just like the chess middle games, the tournament itself got thoda sa slow, very, very slow moving, draws after draws. There also we had a lot of action happening in a sense because you would have Gukesh being in a position where he was slightly lower. I mean, he had the lower hand in a sense. Ding had the upper hand, but Ding did not seem to want to play for wins. Gukesh was the guy who had a significant disadvantage on the board, and he was trying to avoid draws and trying to play for wins. Like at least 2 times, there was a draw offer on the board, and this boy decides, ki nahi, not today. Today, I'm not accepting any draws. I will play for a win or I will play for a loss. Eventually, those 2 games played out into harmless draws only. But it gave us a significant indicator of how both these guys were feeling, You had Gukesh at one end who was losing sometimes, but thinking that, arey, mera position to acha hai. And he was still like going for it. And on the other hand, you had Ding who was looking at a position from the same, like opposite end and thinking, no, it feels like I will lose if I push for a win. So you had that. Then you saw Gukesh suddenly winning out of nowhere a game. As soon as you thought that, okay, now Gukesh is just 3 games away from becoming the youngest world champion, Ding suddenly wins a match. Scores are level. Now you think, okay, Gukesh cannot possibly win. He's going to crumble because like enormity of the occasion and all of that. And Ding has already done it. Gukesh is probably already thinking about the tie breaks because he was a significant underdog in that. And then next thing you know, we have another 1 move blunder from Ding just when it seemed like, things were headed for a draw. And there you have it, the 18th world champion of the world.
Amit, just if we were to go back to the final few moments, I still have been watching it on loop. We are recording this, I think, around 4 hours after after Gukesh became the world champion, and I've watched it multiple times. The final few moments of the match and so much drama. यार हम हमेशा चेस के बारे में बोलते हैं कि it's like 2 people sitting across a board across each other and taking an hour to make a move and fairly expressionless and all those things. But the last 2 minutes, I think those were the most dramatic 2 minutes I've ever seen on a chessboard. For the simple reason, like first when Gukesh's eyes light up when he sees Liren make that blunder, the rook move that he blundered, and then the expressions on his face as he plays out the rest of the match in his mind, just to be sure that, it's what he thinks it is, the blunder. And the flourish with which he made that, the next move, it became apparent that the match is in his favor, he's going to win it. The flourish with which he did that, subsequently, the way Ding just collapsed on the board there with his head buried in his hand. Gukesh then, it's almost like that Mike Tyson moment, right? That legendary photo of Mike Tyson. Gukesh is then prowling around it. He's having this big smile on his face, staring back at Ding. And then him sitting on the chair, taking a couple of sips of water, just kind of soaking in the whole enormity of the moment. And the match then finishing and him breaking down. And it was also very cute, while he's crying, he's also rearranging the pieces on the chessboard before, again smiling back. I haven't seen anything like that on chessboard. Have you guys?
No, I think Amit might be a better person to answer that given the number of matches he's seen. But yeah, it was really fascinating. And I think in between all that, he also did like a little prayer to the board after he arranged the pieces and all that. Looked up. Like you said, Mihir, I think I've seen it about 20 times already in the last 2 hours. It's just compulsive viewing, right? So yeah, really wonderful moments. And I think before we go to Amit, it's also absolutely remarkable that a guy who's been showing this poker face all through I mean, complete contrast to Ding, who I think Amit wrote wears his emotions on the sleeve. Ding, you know how the game is going by looking at Ding, right? But Gukesh never gave that sense till that moment that you mentioned, right? The moment he realizes there's a blunder. So in the press conference, Gukesh says till then, so he was not going to stop pressing for the win. He was just going to keep pushing, as long as it could possibly go on, maybe till the repetition enters. He had a slight advantage, he realized, but it didn't really look winning. But he decided that he was just going to keep pushing, and he in fact said that in his mind he was already thinking about tie breaks, which were imminent for predominant period of the match today. And then suddenly that happens and his face lights up, and this is the most expressive I've seen Gukesh. I've not seen Gukesh too much, but this is the most expressive I've seen Gukesh on the table. And then after crying, after doing all that, in minutes, I mean, he hugs his father. That's a beautiful video as well on social media. Gives his father a big hug. I think then his trainer as well. Then just after all that, he comes to the press conference and speaks for 50 minutes with barely, just happiness and relief. There are no tears, there is no shivering in his voice, there's no emotion as such. He's just happy and he speaks calmly for 50 minutes. I just can't imagine how 18-year-old manages to do all that through this enormous pressure. Absolutely incredible.
Mir, just a couple of things, no? Because we are talking about body language, something I found fascinating was a couple of days back, I think they had got Viswanathan Anand to make the ceremonial first move, right? And Vishy is obviously, as Gukesh has also said, that obviously he's a mentor, somebody that Gukesh treats as an icon. So Viswanathan Anand is there to make the first move, and when he's making it, Gukesh literally completely ignores the man. Like he's just ignored somebody who's coming in the middle of him and his target, right? So there is that moment where he's icon hai, mentor hai, all of that is fine, but Gukesh only has eyes for the board. That is one thing. Second thing, what I've noticed at this whole World Championship is the interesting dynamic that both Gukesh and Ding seem to share, where Gukesh went out of his way to avoid eye contact, and Ding almost seemed to, because chess players, they don't have the luxury of an evaluation bar when they're playing a game. So he almost seemed to look at Gukesh's face every now and then, trying to see if he could read something of it. Have I made a good move? Have I blundered? Things like that. And in fact, today at the press conference, he even said it. He said that, when I looked at Gukesh's face and he was happy and he was excited, that is when I realized that I had actually blundered my rook. And that is when I realized that I had let the game slip out of my hand. That was obviously one thing. Second thing, this thing that you mentioned that, Gukesh starts pacing around, prowling around, the word that you used. That is a very recent addition to his, in-game routines or rhythms, if you will. As soon as he realizes that he's definitely winning, we saw this at the Olympiad also. He will force his opponent into a position where you either surrender yourself or you are checkmated. So he'll put you in that sort of a headlock, then he'll get off the chair and he'll start pacing around in like little semicircles around his chair, staring at your opponent, making for him to like just stop the clock and resign. That is what Gukesh has now also implemented in his body language in a sense. Third thing, I think Vinayakk mentioned this, that he comes at the press conference, is completely almost impassive, emotionless and all that. There was a very nice clip, I don't know if you guys have seen it. Gukesh is sitting in his trailer van that the organizers have provided him and his team to go back to his hotel. As soon as Gukesh goes there, he properly starts sobbing, like he breaks down. I think somebody is trying to tell him from behind how much money he has won or something, and Gukesh is absolutely doesn't care. He properly is sobbing because the enormity of the moment finally hits him. And it's really hilarious if you watch that video, because in a matter of a few seconds, Gukesh composes himself. He becomes his usual completely inscrutable self, comes back, he turns around, whoever that guy is who's talking to him, he says, I'm sorry, you were saying something. And it's almost like it's a switch of a button, 1 second he's like properly sobbing. Second moment, there are literally no tears. He's gone back to his regular self. And just one thing I wanted to say before we move on, I think what we've seen from Gukesh at the World Championship is, it's almost like, I know the word bipolar is sometimes used in a very negative connotation, like it has negative connotations, or they're not negative connotations, but then it's supposed to be much serious. But then with Gukesh, we've seen that, he almost has this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type of personality where, you look at how ruthless he was with Ding when he was facing him. That was one of the mistakes that Ian Nepomniachtchi did last year, because he saw that Ding was depressed. He saw that, Ding was having troubles. And Nepo actually said this in one of the interviews that I felt sorry for him, and that was maybe my biggest mistake. Gukesh never felt sorry for his opponent while he was facing him. But if you look at everything that Gukesh did afterwards, right? At the press conference, Ding spoke first. Gukesh waited for all of that to get done. Then as Ding is done, he's walking back. Gukesh stands up. Make sure that he keeps applauding until Ding is out of the room. He waits for Ding to leave. Then he takes his seat back. Then he's asked a question. First answer, he says, wait, before we start talking about me, I want to talk about Ding. And the first thing that he does is addresses in detail about how Ding is such a great champion, whatever the world might say about him, and the world has said a lot about Ding. He makes sure that he explains what a great champion Ding is and things like that. He didn't need to do that. He had already done his part. He'd shaken the hands of his opponent. And the history of World Championship tells us that, World Championship battles are usually very, very ill-mannered, dour, very testy encounters where all sorts of shenanigans, all sorts of tomfoolery has happened. But the battle that we saw was between two people who really respected each other to the hilt. Just one last thing. The reason why I was talking about, Viswanathan Anand and just tying up to his Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality, when Anand comes on the board to make the ceremonial first move, Gukesh completely ignores him, does not actually pay attention to Anand. And then today, as Mihir pointed out, that he was like sobbing on the board, but he was still rearranging the pieces. At that moment, if you notice that video, Arkady Dvorkovich, who is the FIDE president, he comes in from behind to just congratulate Gukesh. He's the first person to actually congratulate Gukesh after Ding for becoming world champion. And if you notice, there is a very tiny moment where Gukesh actually stands up. Despite everything, he has one hand on his face, wiping off tears. This boy still gets up to greet somebody who's elder to him. He does the handshake. Dvorkovich walks out. This guy sits on the chair again, finishes the rearranging, and then walks out. I mean, it's just incredible. Whatever we've seen and whatever we've read, we've got the chance to read.
One more thing, the Ding part that you mentioned, later in the press conference, also, he said something very interesting, I thought, of how after winning game 11 and losing game 12, it was disappointing for Gukesh, but he actually found it somehow inspirational that Ding was able to do this. Like how he could go from losing a match one day and bouncing back to win out of like request, just pulling out a rabbit out of the hat, so to speak. He said after the initial disappointment, he actually found that inspirational. That I think was, again, like you said, he didn't have to say all this, but it's very nice Gukesh had to say about Ding.
And in fact, he did the same thing even at the candidates, Vinayk. Like at the candidates, Gukesh had exactly one defeat to Alireza Firuza. And in that match, he was actually winning. He had an advantage on the board. And then he let it slip and actually lost. And when everybody saw that, all of them thought, okay, now this boy is going to crumble, because at that stage, he was still joint leader or something like that. Gukesh, after, winning the candidates, said that was the one moment that he actually drew a lot of energy from, because he was like, I was definitely going to win that game. And if time wasn't a factor, I would have definitely won. And I mean, it's some sort of a very reverse psychology thing that happens with this boy, that every time he loses, he just seems to use that as a springboard to like jump higher.
I think also a good time for us to pause and go back a little in time and understand Gukesh's journey till here, because his complete background in August 5, 2023, Amit and I had done an episode which was, it was almost sounds prophetic right now, because it was titled Why 17-year-old Gukesh is a Worthy Successor to Vishy Anand. We'll ask, if possible, Shashank, our producer, if we can just share the link to that episode in this program notes. So you'll find his backstory perhaps over there, and why actually he was anointed as the next big thing, the heir to the throne of Vishy Anand at an age of 17 or even before that. But Amit, also it's crazy because last December was when Gukesh qualified for the candidates, the first step towards challenging for the world title. And now when you look back, it's also funny because his path towards qualifying for the candidates also wasn't that easy, right? I mean, he was traveling all over the world for quite a number of months. He didn't go home. Constantly, he was asked this question of, whether he'll qualify for candidates, whether he'll play there. He had a dip of form after, promising early on, after having a good start to the year. It looked momentarily that he wouldn't even make it to the candidates competition before eventually sneaking in. He wasn't the first Indian to do that. I think after Pragnananda and Vidit Gujarati, he was the third Indian to be there. And from there, he just raced ahead of not just his Indian chess mates, but also the rest of the world, and how differently he's placed a year later.
Yeah, absolutely, Mir. In fact, he snuck into the candidates at the last, like literally when the door, whatever was coming down, he just...
वो होता है ना, world end होने वाला movies होता है, एक छोटा सा door बंद होते जाता है and the world behind you is collapsing before you just sneak out at the last second. वो वाला type of entry था उसका.
हाँ, so he did that, and obviously यार, मतलब if your father is named Rajnikant, आपसे थोड़ा सा तो ऐसा last ditch expectations तो होगा यार, obviously. But yeah, that aside, I think whatever he's done since then has been remarkable, All of his childhood coaches, you have somebody like a Vishnu Prasanna, who was a grandmaster, who was the one who basically shaped him up in his formative years. They usually talk about this, that this boy, when he decides to do something, all of his life basically becomes about that one thing. He's not going to care about other things. So if you look at it that way, Gukesh has barely played in any rapid and blitz tournaments over the last full year, because all of his life, he first was chasing qualifying for the candidates. Then he was chasing a win in the candidates. After he had won it, he was chasing becoming the world champion. And now he's probably become world champion. He's definitely going to staying there, I guess. I don't know. For the next 2 years now, classical might just be his next thing. Is something that he focuses on for the next 2 years.
I think we are running towards the end of this episode. There is so much to talk. I think we'll have to do multiple episodes going ahead. Anyway, it's just cricket season. So we'll be doing the Border Gavaskar Trophy episodes. But I think Gukesh deserves a few more episodes, 1 or 2 at least, where we can completely capture his story. But, before we start wrapping up today's episode, Amit, throughout the World Championship, I found it extremely fascinating because you saw legends of this game, including Magnus Carlsen and the rest that have followed, constantly criticize the level of play. So much so that I think it was Karpov who just said that it's a sad day for chess or something like that, right? After Gukesh won. Kramnik, yeah. It's crazy level of criticism there, and I think Gukesh was also asked about it, and he did say that this doesn't make me the best player in the world, and he'll strive to kind of, do better, defend his title next time, play better too. But this whole debate around the quality of chess that was seen across the 14 matches, how did that play out, and why were the legends of the game, Magnus Carlsen and everyone else who have commented, so unhappy with it?
Obviously, see, chess is something where like the moves that you make is subjective here. Eventually everybody is analyzing it through engines only. अगर engine बोल रहा है अच्छा है तो ठीक है अच्छा है, engine बोल रहा है बुरा है maybe. Otherwise, whatever the move is, if the engine is not being too committal, you just judge on basis of 5 moves down the line, आप उसके साथ क्या करना चाहते हो? What is the target that you are trying to achieve by pushing just 1 pawn, 1 square ahead? Does that give you a gain 5 moves later, 10 moves later is what you have to see, right? So obviously, it's so subjective that अगर एक Kramnik Gukesh की जगह पे बैठा होता, I'm sure he would have made different moves. I'm sure he would have done other things than what Gukesh did. But I don't think you can fault them for doing whatever it is that they did on the board here. Come on. I mean, it can't be the fault of a Gukesh or a Ding Liren that Magnus Carlsen does not fancy himself to play the grind of the World Championship. And we can't even fault Magnus for not wanting to be part of it because he's done it 5 times. It's not easy to be world champion and stay world champion. You end up spending almost half a year to 7-8 months just chasing one thing. And once you've gotten it, you spend another half a year, 1 more year just staying there. So thoda sa ye to hota hai. So I understand Magnus's point, but I mean the criticism is slightly whatever yaar. I think one of the games ke baad, I think Ding was asked about this criticism, that the kind of play that you've done, what do you like? Magnus absolutely thought it was horrible. This can't be a world championship game, things like that. So he was asked about it, and Ding said, all of this, I've read this, it doesn't affect me a whole lot because they're true. And it's almost like मेरे को क्या फर्क गिरता है यार, I am already world champion. तुमको जो बोलना है बोल लो, मेरे को कोई फर्क नहीं गिरता. I am here I'm going to defend my crown. I will fail, maybe I'll succeed. But irrespective, at the end of the day, I am where I am, you are where you are.
Yeah, of course. And
I think even Gukesh had an interesting take. I think the person who asked that question to Gukesh about probably Carlson's criticism or some of the general criticism, I think game 3 or game 4, they asked again that, how did you feel about that question? I got a lot of criticism for asking that question. And Gukesh's answer was mind-blowing actually. He said, I am 18, but that doesn't mean that I'm sitting here expecting easy questions or expecting people to go easy on me just because I'm playing a World Championship title match at 18. Right? I don't want that. I came here prepared for the tough questions, prepared for the tough situations on and off the board. And I am not expecting you guys to go easy on me. And he cheekily added after that, it's nice to see this criticism sometimes because it kind of fires me up a little bit and maybe I won't mind a little bit more of it in the future. I think it's a very, very nice answer to the whole situation at the end.
I think the whole Gukesh press conference can be a story if you're writing or a podcast in itself. Every 100%. Answer is worth. Yeah. It's just so. If we were so smart at 18-year-old, I think हमें life में और कोई चिंता नहीं होती.
I'm telling you guys, वो लड़का 18 मतलब biologically I'm sure वो 18 है, but then emotionally इतना ऐसा कोई सोच ही नहीं सकता यार. मतलब that boy has not been on social media since he went to Singapore like 3 weeks back. ना इंटरनेट सर्फ किया लड़के ने, ना सोशल मीडिया पे था. हाउ कैन यू, मतलब एट द एज ऑफ 18 हाउ कैन यू बी लाइक दैट?
Seriously, it's just incredible. And I think all these parts of his personality, in fact, it'll be great to go behind the scenes also of how he managed to win this title, Amit. He mentioned all his seconds and the turnarounds, the constant, जो एक, one thing I found very थोड़ा सा satisfying is when it comes to the prediction games, I think Mihir Vasavda, Amit Kamath, Vinayakk, Shashank, Bhargava and Magnus Carlsen are in the same league. क्योंकि Magnus एक दिन सुबह उठ के बोलता है Ding is going to crumble and दूसरे दिन बोलता है अरे नहीं Gukesh हारने वाला है. So I think on that level all of us are pretty much the same. So I think that's one big takeaway personally for me.
I think Magnus definitely was trying to be the Paul the Octopus of this World Championship, but failing at it desperately.
Desperately. But yeah, I think we should do an episode where we kind of completely break down Gukesh's World Championship title win, because like we discussed, every game has been fascinating. And yeah, I think there's just so many aspects to his title. Maybe we'll do an episode or at least 2 of it in the coming days. So do watch out for that. Amit, Vinayakk, any last words?
I'd like to add one thing. There was a moment at the press conference, again I go back to, this is for Amit, where Ding is asked to assess his game. He takes his time, mistake, and I saw his face, he was winning. Then he takes about 3-4 seconds to compose himself, pauses for a bit, and then says, no game tomorrow, yeah? I think that works for Amit also. He doesn't have a game tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't need to tell my story anymore, man. This is the best ending.
Yeah, and there won't be a game tomorrow, but there will be a podcast tomorrow because, by the time you finish listening to this emergency episode on D. Gukesh becoming the youngest ever world champion, we will also be recording our preview part of the Border Gavaskar Trophy's 3rd test match. Back to mundane things, I must say, in life, or who knows, the Brisbane test, if it's half as exciting as the last time India played Australia at Gabba, we'll be in for more drama. So do watch out for our preview episode, and do also watch out for the episode in which we'll break down Gukesh's World Championship match. Thank you for listening to Game Time. Amit, Vinayakk, Shashank and I will be back, I think, tonight. We'll see you again. Thanks.
You were listening to Express Sports by the Indian Express. This show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.